Most sailors over 55 don't need a larger boat. What they actually need is a more intelligent one. That's a distinction the market almost never makes clearly, and it's one that ends up costing people serious money and real comfort when they get it wrong. The default assumption is that more length fixes the problem, or more engine power, or a sleeker, more contemporary profile. But after a few offshore passages, after a few weeks genuinely living aboard, what starts to matter is far more specific. Headroom that doesn't make you pay a price every time you stand up straight. A pilot house that keeps you sheltered from the elements without isolating you from what's happening on the water. A layout that works not just for a weekend getaway, but for weeks at a stretch, offshore, in actual conditions. For a lot of experienced sailors, Motorsailers are the honest answer to that question. Not a compromise, a deliberate decision. Protection, range, comfort, and enough canvas to take advantage of the wind when it shows up. But not every motorsailor is built around the same priorities. Some look convincing from the dock and let you down below. Some have solid bones but the wrong finish. And some simply weren't designed with extended livability as the primary goal. These 5 were. Let me take you through each one, honestly. The Beneteau Evasion 36 is a genuinely unusual entry in Benetow's catalogue, and sailors who haven't stepped aboard one tend to write it off too quickly. On paper it reads as a compact cruiser. Get inside and your opinion shifts fast. The interior works with a split-level layout that achieves something you rarely come across on a boat this size. True 360-degree visibility from within. Large windows wrap around the pilot house and saloon. Natural light fills the space throughout the day. It doesn't feel like you're tucked inside a hull. It feels open, and that quality compounds over time in ways most buyers don't fully account for when they're shopping. The helm sits slightly elevated, with the galley and nav station positioned just below. The flow between areas is logical. You're not clambering over furniture or squeezing through tight gaps to move around. From the saloon, you can read what's happening outside without setting foot on deck. For a solo sailor who's managing everything single-handed, that's a practical benefit, not an added luxury. Sleeping accommodation is divided between a forward V-berth and a dedicated aft cabin sitting under the cockpit. Both are genuinely usable. Headroom lands around 6'2", which means movement below feels natural rather than crouched and uncomfortable. The cockpit is well sheltered. The handrails are reassuringly solid. The maintenance surfaces are built for practicality rather than show. What the Evasion 36 consistently delivers is the feeling that everything aboard requires a little less effort. That's not a trivial thing. On a long passage, fatigue builds incrementally. A boat that works alongside you rather than against you makes a real difference over days and weeks, one that's genuinely hard to appreciate until you've sailed the alternative. The Fisher 30 represents a completely different design philosophy, and it's worth understanding what that philosophy actually produces in practice. This is a boat conceived in the 1970s around a very clear set of priorities. Reach anywhere, live aboard fully, and shelter the crew from whatever the sea decides to throw at you. It delivers on all 3, without apology, and without pretending to be anything other than what it is. The pilot house is the defining feature. Enclosed, panoramic, structurally solid. You are not standing exposed at a wheel in a North Atlantic swell. You are seated inside a protected station, with full visibility all around you. That fundamentally changes the experience of passage making. It removes the attrition, the cold, the spray, the constant physical work of bracing yourself on an open deck. The Fisher absorbs all of that for you. Below, the headroom measures just over 6'2". On a 30-foot boat, that figure is genuinely meaningful. It means the Fisher doesn't feel like a 30-footer once you're inside. The main cabin carries an L-shaped saloon, a practical galley layout, and a proper enclosed head. Not generous by today's standards, but sensibly organized and built with a quality that has held its ground across decades. The interior woodwork is traditional, solid teak, warm rather than clinical. It reads as craftsmanship from a period when builders used materials that lasted, because lasting was the expectation. If you've spent recent time on modern production boats with their laminates and lightweight panels, dropping into a Fisher 30 cabin feels noticeably different, more substantial, more settled. For solo offshore sailing, the Fisher's proportions and structural integrity make it a boat you can genuinely trust. It's not fast, it won't turn heads, but it goes where you point it and keeps you comfortable in the process. For a lot of seasoned sailors, that's exactly the right trade-off. The Nauticat 331 takes the pilot house concept and develops it further than most motorsailers bother to attempt. On most boats in this category, the pilot house is essentially a protected steering position. On the Nauticat, it becomes the central living space. The main seating, the helm, the view out to the horizon, all of it is raised into the upper level. You are living up high, not buried in the hull. For anyone who has put in real time on a conventional layout, the difference in daily comfort registers quickly and stays with you. The sleeping arrangement separates accommodation at each end of the boat, forward cabin and aft cabin, linked through the pilot house level. The aft cabin in particular is properly sized, private, spacious, and realistically suited for extended offshore use, even when another person is aboard. A secondary dining area near the galley below gives you options depending on what conditions are doing. In rough weather or cold temperatures, you retreat to the sheltered lower level. In fair conditions, you live up top. Headroom in the pilot house runs around 6'3". Finish build quality. Nauticat is a Scandinavian manufacturer with a well-established offshore reputation, means the construction is honest and durable. The woodwork is satin finished, clean and well detailed without overreaching. It doesn't perform luxury, it simply delivers it, quietly. The Nauticat 331 is the kind of boat that takes several days aboard to fully understand. The layout rewards extended use far more than it impresses on a quick walkthrough. That is very often the sign of a well-thought-out cruising boat. The Motiva 39 DS is less familiar than the others on this list, and that gap between its profile and its actual quality is worth addressing directly, because this boat deserves considerably more attention than it generally receives. Built in Northern Europe to handle genuine conditions, the North Sea is not a forgiving place to develop a boat. The Motiva pairs structural confidence with a deck saloon layout that keeps you aware of the outside world without exposing you to it. The pilot house is not decorative. It's a proper command position, solid when it's rough, clear in every direction. The interior organization stands out. The deck saloon brings together a U-shaped seating area, a navigation table, and an interior helm station, all within the same integrated zone. You run the boat from inside, surrounded by what you need, always reading conditions outside without having to endure them. Below, a secondary dinette near the galley gives you a more contained space for the harder days. The center cockpit configuration works as a genuine advantage here. It creates a natural division between the cockpit and the aft cabin, which becomes a proper private suite. For extended offshore passages or for sailing with a partner, that separation is worth something real. Privacy on a 40-foot boat is often theoretical. On the Motiva, it's actual. This boat was designed for sailors who won't accept a forced choice between capability and comfort. It's heavier, more purposeful, and unlikely to attract attention from anyone prioritizing a glamorous dock presence. But offshore, those same qualities become assets. Heavy displacement smooths the motion. Solid construction absorbs the miles, and a well-organized interior slows the fatigue that accumulates over a long passage in a way that matters. The Moody Carboneer 44 is the largest boat on this list, and it sets a different kind of standard altogether. Designed under the guidance of Laurent Giles, one of the more respected names in serious yacht design, the Carboneer 44 was built for sailors who wanted genuine ocean capability without surrendering the quality of life they'd had ashore. That sounds like something lifted from a sales brochure. In this case, it accurately describes the boat. At 44 feet, the dimensions allow for things that smaller motor sailors can only gesture toward. The aft cabin is a complete owner's stateroom. Double berth with access from both sides, a dressing area, real storage, and an ensuite head. Not a curtained-off corner with a folding door, a proper private space. For anyone who has lived on a smaller boat and managed the constant choreography of sharing tight quarters, that distinction carries genuine weight. The separation between working and living areas is well resolved. The saloon handles socializing. The pilot house manages navigation and sailing. The aft cabin is private. These zones don't bleed into each other and generate compromise the way they do on boats where the designer had less space to work with. The galley sits slightly below the saloon level, large enough for full-size equipment, properly ventilated, and organized for offshore use rather than casual day-trip cooking. Heavy displacement means the Carboneer's motion at sea is damped and stable. Combined with the protected helm position, that makes long passages considerably less physically taxing than a comparable lightweight design. For solo sailing at 60, that matters directly. Managing fatigue is every bit as important as managing seamanship at that stage. 5 boats, 5 different takes on the same fundamental challenge. How do you design a motor sailor that genuinely works for experienced sailors who want to cruise seriously, live well aboard, and stop spending every passage fighting either the boat or the conditions? What connects all 5 is a shared commitment to interior practicality over marina appearance. Pilot houses that earn their place, layouts that survive weeks of actual use, headroom that reflects how people move, accommodation that allows proper rest rather than just a place to sleep. The Evasion 36 delivers light and visibility in a compact, workable package. The Fisher 30 gives you traditional offshore confidence backed by real structural integrity. The Nauticat 331 raises your living space above the waterline in a way that genuinely shifts the day-to-day experience. The Motiva 39DS builds in the kind of structural seriousness that offshore conditions demand. And the Carboneer 44 demonstrates what becomes possible when scale and design quality come together without anyone being forced to cut corners. None of them is the right answer for every situation. All of them are worth knowing about. If you've owned any of these boats or spent real time aboard one, actual passage making, not just a weekend on the hook, I want to hear your honest assessment. Where the layout held up under pressure, where it fell short, what you'd change if you could, and what you'd keep without hesitation. That's where this kind of conversation actually gets useful. And if you want straightforward, experience-based content on motor sailors, cruising decisions, and what genuinely performs offshore, rather than what photographs well at a boat show, hit subscribe. That's the kind of content this channel is built around.